It's time, my friends, for another Devo tip on the sacred conspiracy to redeem marriage, part 2, Ephesians 5:25 through 33. One weird, long-standing conspiracy theory suggests that Walt Disney's head is frozen, like under Cinderella's castle or under the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. Gee, is there a secret message in Disney on Ice? I don't know. But the sacred conspiracy to redeem marriage is real. If part 1 did not get me into trouble, I'm sure part 2 will. Paul tells us all to walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God in Ephesians 5:2. This, of course, is especially true in marriage. Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Paul doesn't tell husbands to make sure their wives are submissive. Instead, he directs us away from an authority-subservience paradigm towards a sacrificial-assistance paradigm. Christ died so that we might reflect his radiant glory. So Paul says, Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her and present the church to himself in splendor. So in a similar way, as husbands voluntarily lay down their lives, their wives will shine as image bearers in character, calling, and gifting. By elevating their wives as their own body, husbands voluntarily lower themselves to equal status with their wives. So he who loves his wife loves himself, Paul says. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. To push his point home, Paul tells us that the wife's respect for her husband is contingent on his love for her. So the husband is to love his own wife as himself, so that she may respect her husband. It all reminds me of Jesus interrupting the disciples when they were arguing over who was the greatest among them. Just a guess here, but isn't it the one who's going to lay down his life? Later when the disciples are fighting over the who's in charge issue again, Jesus tells them, in this world, the kings and great men lord it over their people. But among you, it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you shall take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. Luke 22. You see, a true leader doesn't exercise his authority to rule over anyone, ever. So why does Paul suddenly quote Genesis 2:24 in Ephesians 5:31? He says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Why does he quote Genesis here? Well, he's reminding us that marriage is more than an emotional bond, a friendship. Just look at a child, and it becomes obvious that two separate individuals have literally become one new flesh. Only a man and a woman can do that. Does it matter? Yes, and here's why. Paul says this mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Why is this connection such a profound mystery? Well, I'm going to quote from Brian Neil Peterson, because he says this. In the same way, husband and wife marry and procreate and bring forth a new generation, so too the love between Christ and his bride was to produce children, in a metaphorical sense, that is, spiritual children, through the spreading of the gospel in order to propagate belief in God to the next generation. Failure to do so would cause the church to cease in one generation. So by linking the union of a man and a woman in marriage to Christ's union with his people, Paul sanctifies marriage and the church's mission to bring forth new life.